Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, as I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our communities. What did they do to get started? And what are they doing to stay there? Oh my goodness, here we are. We are in season 6, Q1, and I'm bringing you another special guest today. As today, you're going to get to hear from my good friend, Louis Lessig. Louis, well, he's the employment law translator. Louis works for Brown and Connery, LLP. He's an attorney that practices labor and employment litigation, counseling. He does some negotiation training, and he does a lot of speaking. Louis, hey, great to have you on the show. How you doing, man?
Bruce, it's great to see you, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
So I always like to reflect on when I met my podcast guests, or maybe when they came into my path. But for you, it's at the National SHRM Conference. I've got to see you speak. I believe the first time we met, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but a mutual friend of ours, Greg Hawks, I think he was speaking at his first event. We were both in there. And do you remember that?
As a matter of fact, I do, and he is a dear friend. So I always make it a point when I go to events, particularly annual conference, if I know other speakers, either through
Mm.
NSA or somewhere else, that I make it a point to get in there, get some stills, maybe a little video. And Greg is definitely one of those folks that I always make it a point to come and see. So I do remember that.
That's fantastic. I love that. And I want to talk I want to talk around your strength zone, which is employment law, but we're going to be speaking too. I notice you're also a member of the National Speakers Association, so we're going to definitely get into that. But I would love like as we kick this off, for those who don't know you, I want to hear the Louis Lessig story. Like, where did you grow up and how did you, like, what road led you to be an attorney? And then now, even doing a lot of speaking as well.
Well, it's funny. I started off at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and contrary to popular belief, my undergrad is actually in HR. I was in my senior internship at Lehigh Valley Hospital. At the time, they had about 5,000 non-union employees, and I was with one of the generalists who was taking me around. And it's funny how you remember things. I remember being in the belly of one of the hospitals, specifically right outside the refrigeration section, because, of course, food service is a place where we tend to have some employee issues at times. And he turned to me and said, do you want to do benefits your whole life?
Hmm.
And to be honest, I have nothing against benefits. It's not my bag, though. And so I turned and said, well, not really. And he said, well, you're okay figuring this stuff out. You ought to consider law school.
Hmm.
And so I sat back and said to myself, the job market was iffy when I got out of school. And I figured, let me give this a shot. And as it turned out, I was the third youngest person in my law school class. And as I was going through, I met some professors. And at one point, actually, we had a business doing training and development. It was myself, one of my professors, and two other gentlemen. And for a while, we were doing all sorts of stuff. In fact, I remember doing some training at Mercedes-Benz USA up in North Jersey.
Hmm.
And, it's always interesting to be a 20 something and driving somewhere to do training where everybody else's car is light years more expensive than yours. But little claims to fame. And then when I got out of school, did my clerkship and then tried to get back into employment law. And it ended up, I was with one firm, and that first firm, I was there about 11 months. And I always think it's important to know that there's reality behind all the things that we learn.
Hmm.
And the managing partner at the time came to me and he said, you're a nice guy, but we just don't see a future for you here. We're not firing you, but you need to go find another job.
Hmm.
And candidly, I was a bit devastated. So I called the judge I was clerking for at the time, or I had clerked for, went down to see him. I explained to him what happened. And he turned to me and said, the firm you went to, they do this to make sure that you don't get a bonus, but the partners get the hours out of you they need.
Hmm.
And I later understood this was a regular thing that they did. But I was lucky enough that he picked up a phone and reached out to someone and said, I know you're looking for an employment law associate. I happen to have somebody sitting here in my office. I met with them later in the week, and I've been at Brown and Connery ever since.
Oh my goodness, what a great story. I love what you said. It's amazing what you learn from reality. You're sitting here having a conversation, and someone tells you, hey, you ought to consider law school. Next thing it reminded me of I was in a conference one time. Mel Robbins, the great motivational speaker, she said, a conversation can change your life if you're open to having conversations. And I thought about this guy here really changed the trajectory. You went to law school and then the judge, like he's like, I always like to talk about people who have helped high performers such as yourself. It seems like they have a common thread. They have mentors or sponsors in their life that have helped them move through their career. Talk about maybe a couple of people that have helped you in your career, and what was it that made them such a good mentor?
Well, Dennis, who was the gentleman that I knew when I was in college that
Yeah,
got me on the legal path,
yeah.
he was a very interesting individual,
Hmm.
somewhat of a savant, if you will. He was always looking ahead. He was one that enjoyed having interns from various schools and teaching them what he knew as he was getting more senior in his career. And I really appreciated his vision and opportunity to have a conversation as we
Hmm.
did things. It wasn't just pushing paper in that internship, which was
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
But then later on, when one of my partners back in the day, the training company that I had until 9/11, my professor, Jim Castanera, was one of those folks too. He called me up one day during my clerkship and said, "Listen, I don't have a job for you, but come and have a beer." And that led to a 5 year stint with that company till it sort of had its own end.
Hmm.
But it also led to, in fact, we were talking about this before we got started today, co-authoring the addendum to a book,
Hmm.
although candidly, it's a bit of a paperweight at 850 some odd pages on drafting and revising employment policies and handbooks.
That's a thick book, by the way.
But I listen, it's a great it's always helpful when I teach or I speak because I am a published author,
Yeah.
but I don't talk about it much.
Yeah.
And then when you get further along, I think that there have been certainly Bill Tambusi, who is one of my partners now, one of our managing partners, has been very instrumental for me in terms of helping guide things, as well as an individual that saw me when I was speaking for a local chapter somewhere for a SHRM chapter
Hmm.
and came up to me afterwards and said, you've got something here. You should come and check us out at NSA and that was Todd Cohen,
Hmm.
and Todd was very supportive of me, and it took a little while to sort of see all the different pieces, but it's interesting, Bruce. I had a chance to, well, I'm obviously a litigator,
Hmm.
and while not a high percentage of cases actually see the inside of a courtroom, I did recently try a case. And I remember sitting down with my associate, trying to be a mentor to him, and
Hmm.
saying, listen, when we're thinking about how we're going to try this case, we have to think about everything in the room. Where is the easel going to be for the
Hmm.
organizational chart we're going to design? Or where are you going to stand when
Hmm.
you're asking questions of a witness? Because it's about, to your point, Bruce, a conversation between the jury and the witness and yourself and eliciting what we need. And what I came to understand and why I'm so avidly involved in NSA and speaking is because whether I'm in a courtroom or I'm on a stage, it's still the opportunity to influence people, to have them understand how the story evolves
Hmm.
and how to get from A to B.
Hmm. I love that. That is fantastic. Hadn't really thought about that, but I've heard great speakers talk about the stage and everything set up, and you're sitting here talking about the same thing inside the courtroom. I'm sure we should be always thinking about that, like we're going to present with, I don't know, maybe we're going to present a business case with our boss in a meeting. We need to be looking at big picture and things like that. I love that. Hey, I want to ask you this. You said it kind of took a little while on the speaking side. And shout out to Todd Coing. Wow, that's fantastic. You said it took a little while, but then you kind of found your lane. I wrote the book Find Your Lane. I'm always interested in knowing like when someone found purpose in what they do, when they found their calling. Was there a moment when you said, "Hey, I really like this speaking thing that I'm doing. I'm doing a lot of it. I'm getting pretty good at it." Was there a moment or were there moments in that process?
I think for me, there were more moments. When you're young in your career, you
Yeah.
take whatever you can get. And the opportunity that I got, even from the then president of the local SHRM chapter, Monica McClintock, who
Hmm.
came to me, and I always credit her with changing my life in SHRM,
Hmm.
because she came to me and said, "Listen, would you like to do the legislative update for the chapter?" And I dove right into that and spent time on it. And as over time, Bruce, it was one of those things where I began to realize, A, I like this. B, if everyone has their own thing, and I
Hmm.
thought, this is my thing. I can
Hmm.
own the stage.
Hmm.
The same way I talk to my kids. My one son plays competitive ice hockey, and I tell him, even though you're the right wing, you own the net, not the goalie. Score the goal. And in the same way, I do feel as if when you get up on stage, and I know it, you do a fair amount of speaking yourself, you got to own that stage,
Yeah.
and there's something to that.
Yeah.
So it was a repetitive thing. In fact, I
Hmm.
remember the first time that I spoke on a national stage for SHRM was, I want to say, 2007.
Wow. Okay.
I think it was either Vegas or San Diego.
Okay.
And the amazing thing to me was they didn't throw me off stage, and they have accepted me to speak every single year since then.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. I've heard also that once people see you and see the value you bring, they want to keep bringing you back. And so I love all that. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. You're in New Jersey, is that correct? And where's your local SHRM chapter? Is that New Jersey as well, or is that Delaware?
So it is New Jersey, and
Okay.
the actual chapter is Tri-State HRMA, or at least at
Okay.
the moment it is till they rebrand it.
Tri-state. Okay. Okay, that's fantastic. I love that. And so you'll see a lot of common threads linked to SHRM, of course, me being part of Texas SHRM as well. Hey, I want to talk to you about a couple things. Number one, whenever you thought about the legal updates, all of a sudden that was your brand, right? People saw you as, hey, he can help us in that area. And the reason why I wanted to mention this is because there's listeners right now. They're taking notes just like I am. There's some that want to get out there and do more speaking. But the brand is very, very important. I want to talk about legal. You have this brand around helping with legal. Talk for a minute, first and foremost about what's going on right now in this world of legal. It seems like there's always updates. It's always a very popular meeting at the local SHRM chapters just because everything changes so much. But as we kick off 2025, I want to real quick just kind of dive into what are some things that I don't know people need to maybe keep their eye on, or maybe a common thread that you see and are going to continue to see in 2025.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think one of the things we need to be mindful of is, even with the new administration, things may change at the top,
Okay.
but the people that run the operation, frontline people that you see, whether we're talking about the EEOC or the Department of Labor or the FTC, they're still there. They're
Okay.
still doing the job. There may be a slight shift in focus,
Okay.
but Title VII is not going anywhere,
Hmm.
and AI is not going anywhere. And the need to understand and embrace AI within an organization is a critical piece. I think we're only going to find more out about.
Hmm.
And one issue that employers have to pay attention to is, what are we doing with it and how are we conveying that to employees?
Hmm.
Oh, but wait, there's more. Because year over year, if you look at the last, say, 5, 6 years and more, retaliation as a claim through the EEOC has increased 20% year over year, last year being more than 81,000 charges.
Wow.
So you start to look at that and realize that this is the big ticket item that people
Mm,
really need to focus on. That is one of those big things. And both AI and retaliation I've been talking a lot about from the stage. And the other piece is a bit more quiet.
mm,
And I think that businesses are going to see it more and more because last year, Supreme Court was kind enough to give us a case. And, I know that sometimes some listeners will want to know the cases, but to be fair, let's cut to the chase. The
okay.
bottom line is this. Uh, we have a situation now where it used to be you needed some heightened level standard, if you will, to succeed on a Title VII claim,
Mm,
basically making it easier for us to get out of summary judgment. Well, now that's changed.
mm,
We only need some level of harm. The court said there was never a stepped up level that was necessary. And the question then becomes, okay, well, what is some harm for an employer? And
mm,
so I think we're going to see this play out in courts across the country.
mm.
And by the time we all get together, be it SHRM National in a chapter meeting or at a state council, or any other place where you may be hearing about this stuff, you're going to hear more and more about these things.
Mm,
Uh, and I don't think it's the end either. There's been a big thing, as we both know, around civility.
mm.
Those metrics continue to be concerning. And I think it's something we got to pay attention to because if you look at the EEOC and their research, it says that everything starts with civility. And if we're nice to one another, I know, a shocking concept. But if we're just nice to one another, you never get to the bullying or to the discrimination.
Right.
And it's a real challenge. I mean, there's a multitude of things we can talk about. Obviously, we have pay equity issues.
Hmm.
There's a lot of question now around overtime. The fact that last calendar year, it was jettisoned, and now the question becomes, where's it going to go?
Mm.
At a time when, to be fair to employers, it's not as easy out there as everybody says. And so I think there's a multitude of things going on.
Mm.
And by the way, that's also why I think, Bruce, that people are so interested in what we have to say. Because from my perspective, there are a lot of lawyers out there that put things out. Some are better writing and some are better speaking. And I think
Okay.
it's important to find what works best for you and who you connect best with because things are constantly in flux. I don't
Mm.
expect to understand the movement of stuff, which is totally your world. At the same time, I presume that no one's necessarily going to understand employment law or follow it as closely as I will. And so it's all about our network and the people that we
Mm.
know and the ability to share information because that's so critically important.
Yeah, they just recently, last month, there was a new president that moved into 1600 Pennsylvania, and I wrote a blog on it. And it's funny, you talk about the logistics of moving. That's a move like no other, by the way. 100 staff are moving items for the president. I wrote a blog and I was writing some funny things like somebody's picking up a couch saying, "Hey, who's going to help me pick up this couch and move it?" Because of the security involved in that, they don't actually have movers that come in and do that. So when you said that, it made me think about that. This is so good. So I wrote down so many different things with the retaliation AI. Obviously, a Title VII civility is a big thing. We talk about that at SHRM and the pay equity and the overtime. I love that. As you were sharing that, though, here's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about Lewis, that's a lot. That is a lot to know about and to counsel people and to train people. So here's what I want to know from you is like, how much do you study and invest time into all of this different important things that people need to know about? What's your, I don't know, what's that like? Is that a daily thing? Is that you're continuously researching? Talk about that for a second.
Well, I will say, I think we're kindred spirits from the perspective that we're both lifelong learners.
Mm.
And I will admit that I do not have the fortitude to read as many books as you do, sir. But part of the reason for that is I'm keeping up on all this stuff. So there's a multitude of ways and places that I get information, and as we all do.
Yeah.
I think the challenge, of course, is where are we getting our information, which becomes just as important as the information itself.
Mm.
But some of it is through the cases that come up. Some of it is through the experiences, some of it's through networking.
Mm,
But certainly, I think it's important to keep an eye on all of the different things that are occurring
mm.
and how we can best make a difference. And so that's been a lot of my focus. But to your point, it's a daily thing.
Yeah, right.
And it's not a 6 day a week thing either.
Right. Yeah. I always talk about it. You don't learn it in a day, you learn it every day, whatever you're doing. And, that's one thing I've learned about high performers. I've interviewed more than 200 on the podcast. We know many, and they all have a common thread. They all work. They all are, like you said, they're continuous learners. Once they find their lane, what they really enjoy doing and talking about, they just dive into that. Hey, I want to dive into and by the way, I'm going to, towards the end of the show, I'm going to give you a chance to put out where people can find this information for anything that you've shared today. I do want to jump into though, like you're a busy guy. I mean, you're practicing law, you are serving your clients, you are speaking, but you also volunteer. You've been a chapter leader. You continue to serve on the local level. You've been on the state level. You have served at the national level. I call it the national level, the MAC. You're a former MAC member. You can talk about that. Here's what I wanted for all those listening. There's people listening right now and they're taking notes. They're like, "Oh my gosh, man, this guy's is exhausting. He's got so much going on, but yet he enjoys what he's doing. He's found that lane." I would love for you to talk about how did you get started in volunteering, and why is that important, especially for those listening that are saying, "I really need to get involved, but just haven't." Talk about that for a second. And what's that done for you?
First, let me start, Bruce, by saying that there has been nothing more important from my perspective than finding a way to give back.
Mm.
And it's funny. I don't want to date myself, but I remember when the Sherm magazine was a monthly magazine that was sizable and was a big deal. Because at the time I was dare I say, a Sherm student member.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, and I think similarly to being a lifelong learner, I think it's important for people to understand that giving back is particularly important.
Mm.
You mentioned the fact that I recently finished up my 2 year stint as the Northeast MAC representative, which is the highest volunteer role within SHRM, and I was
Mhm.
responsible for the states between Maine and Maryland, including Pennsylvania. And we sat down at one point before reporting to the board of trust or board of directors, and we figured out how many years of membership and volunteering in SHRM we had collaboratively, and it was well over 100. And it
Wow.
was funny because in a conversation we had, I said, "Well, I think at the time I was at like 28." And they turned to me and they said, "Wait, they're doing the math." And I said, "Well, I was a student member, and the
Yes.
only time I wasn't a member was during law school." But what I found was so amazing was this. It was the connection. It was the ability to be at a Greg Hawkes session and meet you and other amazing folks
Mm.
and be able to get to know them and want to help and give back. And at the chapter level, it's very local. It's very how can we support what's happening literally in your hometown? When we start looking at the state, no matter what state or commonwealth or district you're in, we start to look a little bit broader and consider what's happening within the borders of our state, what's important to the organizations that are there and to the people, because it's all about the workplace at the end of the day. And when you end up at the national level, what you find is there's a whole desire at much more of a macro level. And yet people can give back at any level, however they choose to do it, and whatever the motivation is. But I will tell you one thing, Bruce. It was very hard for me when we were at the volunteer leader business meeting and Mike Aiken was thanking the three of us that were rolling off of the Mac. It's a very fulfilling thing to volunteer.
Yeah.
And I think you have to do it, and I know you've done it too,
Hmm.
that you have to volunteer in order to understand, but it's also being open-minded and willing.
Mm.
And I've been fortunate enough to be in all sorts of states and all sorts of chapters all over the country. The nice part that I have found is that it is truly an amazing community of people that are like-minded, who are all trying to make a difference in the workplace. And that is incredibly fulfilling for me. And it's interesting because I was president of my local chapter while I was getting involved with the National Speakers Association. The board there came to me and said, "Listen, we want you to become president of the chapter." And I said, "Look, I'm not going to walk away from my obligation to the chapter at SHRM. And by the way, I'm going to end up being state director at SHRM. So there's a window of time. If you want me, we can figure this out." And we literally sat down with a calendar. And what I learned, and the reason why I was willing to do this is because in the same way that SHRM is a community and part of, I would say, my tribe, I found the same thing in the National Speaker Association, but for speakers. And the common thread being everyone's thinking the same way. Everyone's trying to be supportive of one another. In fact, Bruce, I would think to some degree, and I think you'll appreciate this, the gentleman who founded the National Speaker Association, his thought is we're not vultures. We're not taking from one another. We have a pie, we can cut the pie.
Mm.
But if we have more people coming in, we just need to make collaboratively a bigger pie. And there's something to that. And it's that mindset. And I think it's that supportive mindset that is also in SHRM that has made it so much fun for me to be a volunteer in both places. And I would encourage folks, whatever the organization is that is more where your tribe is, roll up your sleeves, raise your hand, whisper in somebody's ear, and volunteer.
I love that. I love all of that. One of the things I was thinking about, when we had the pandemic years ago, it really accelerated the opportunity to learn across the country. Here you are, you're in New Jersey area, and you can also do virtual events too. Do you find yourself doing some virtual speaking events? I know that you have a website at louislessig.com. I'll put that in the show notes, of course. I thought I saw some virtual on there as well. You do that as well for the listeners if they wanted to hear something you had to share?
I do both virtual and in person. And
Okay.
now, to be fair, I'll do the virtual because it works for everybody.
Yeah.
But there's, as you know, as a speaker, there's
Uh,
nothing like a live audience, man.
my jokes just don't work as well virtually. I'm like, hey, is anybody laughing out there? Somebody give me something in the chat. That's
And they
so
don't turn
funny.
the cameras on. You're like, wait, I'm talking to a
That's so
camera.
funny. I love that. Hey, I want to ask you real quick, what's it like to present to the board at SHRM? Johnny C. Taylor Jr. heading up the table there. Is it nerve-wracking? Is it like what's that like? I don't know. Give us some insight.
Well, I'm going to share a funny story,
Oh,
and
good.
I hope the board is not offended by this, and certainly not Johnny.
Okay.
But I try in my day job. I deal with a lot of serious topics, and my personality has been that I try and inject some humor into otherwise very serious issues
Mhm.
to try and disarm folks and get them to calm down and get to where I got to get to. So, for those that don't know, the Mac come in and we have spent year over year a lot of time raising the stature of the Mac with the board. And so what we did, I want to say we were at the Win because I remember it took forever to get to the room we had to be in.
Yes.
And I think for those of you who are familiar with conferences, some of the ballrooms are crazy big and
Hmm.
the ceilings must be 150 feet tall. Well, they took us into this room at least close to a football field. It was
Wow.
huge. And so there was a lot of space. So they brought the Mac down front. Mike Aiken was kind enough to introduce us. And we have so much room. We're literally standing with our arms out to the side so that we're taking up more space. And we're talking to the board. And they're not too far from us, but they're probably a good 20 feet away at least. And we're having this conversation, and it got each of us takes the report that we provided in writing to the board, and then we each get, I would say, about 90 seconds to say a pre-prepared remarks, and then we open up the questions. And so it gets to me, and I'm talking about policy, not politics, and some of the issues that were in the report. And I put a word in that was intentional, and the word was shrmaverse. And I was talking about all the things in the shrmaverse that we deal with, both the Mac members and all of our members and the 300,000 plus folks. And Johnny wasn't really paying attention. He was like looking down at his computer. I'm thinking, what is going on? And so we got done and we opened up the questions, and it gets to Johnny, and he says, "Now, Louis, I wasn't ignoring you. I was buying shrmaverse.com." And then I turned to my colleagues when we got out of there, and I'm like, wait a minute. What the heck was I should have bought that. What was I thinking?
Oh, that is a great story.
But we have had the opportunity. It is
Yeah.
nerve-wracking and it is
Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah.
Um, but here's the amazing part. You have people who are CEOs
Mm,
and CHROs of, the Fortune 200 in that room along with the staff. And the staff at Sherm is amazing. But at the end of the day, it's a business. And so hearing from us as the conduit to all the members and all the state councils is so helpful to the board. And I remember, in fact, in that meeting, and the board members, several of them asked us, how do we express our thanks to
mm,
all of the volunteer leaders across the country and around the world
mm,
who helped make us who we are?
mm.
And that was incredibly gratifying, even in my nervousness.
Yeah. Oh, this has been so much fun. I love that. There's a couple that, first of all, thank you for serving. You guys have done a wonderful job. You're the group that put together the playbook. If you're a SHRM volunteer, you get to see that on the volunteer leader exchange. And you've just, it's been a pleasure getting to know you and watch you during your journey. Uh, I'm going to shift over here to it's time to accelerate for some fun facts as we kind of wind down the show here. First of all, you mentioned your book. By the way, I didn't realize you were a co-author. Hey, a co-author is an author, man. I love that. You do read a few books. So you got any favorites?
Well, it's funny. One of my favorite books, of course, is The Go-Giver.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Bob Berg, and that's a big favorite of mine. And
Mm,
then the two most recent books I've read, ironically, are from folks that I know. One is Status Quo to Status Grow, which is by Todd Cohen,
mm,
and that's the latest book in his series around sales culture and building and thinking about how everybody in your organization is a part of that process with your organization and the clients that you have. And the other is by Jeffrey Klein, which is the Content Beast,
mm.
because
Watching it beast.
I am always trying to figure out how to better deliver and find the stuff that I need. And so those two gentlemen have been very helpful. But the one that I've read multiple times has been The Go-Giver.
I will put that in the show notes. It's amazing all the guests that share their books. I'm immediately going out and ordering a book, and I learn something from every book. So it's so good. I love that. I always talk about so in Life and Leadership Lane. When I wrote that book, I have a chapter called "Great Leaders are Grateful Leaders." What are you most grateful for?
I am grateful for every person that has ever put out a hand, offered to support and make things better, not just for myself,
Mm,
but for everyone else along the way. We are but stewards and we're not here forever. And many of our work, particularly in leadership, is a temp job. And so all of those folks that help make what we do possible,
mm.
as well as all the people that come after us.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm grateful to get to know you as well and to have you on the show today. This has been so much fun. Two more questions here. The first question I have is, what are you looking forward to most in 2025? I mean, here we are, we're in Q1. We got a whole year in front of us. You got anything big out there that you're excited about?
I am really excited to get back on stage. And it appears at the moment that I will be also back in the courtroom, which is fantastic. So, two of the things I love doing so I'm really excited. It's gonna be a great year, and so those are the work things, and then on the kids, we'll just have to see because man, they always surprise me.
I love that. Hey, before I ask you this last question, I'm just going to ask you real quick. There's somebody listening right now. They're like, "Hey, I want to start speaking. What's a good place for them to start? Is it the National Speakers Association? Is it like I tell people I started at Toastmasters many years ago, but I don't know. What's one tip you would give someone if they're listening? They're like, "Hey, I think I want to try to do some speaking."
I think the best thing to do is whether it's Toastmasters or it's the National Speakers Association, find the local chapter that's near you and check it out. But
Yeah.
I also think an opportunity, because this is how I started, is to go to your local SHRM chapter and raise your hand
Mm.
and offer to do stuff. Sometimes even if you're in the front of that room,
Mm.
whether you're talking about an event or their conference or introducing a speaker or doing a legislative update, every one of those opportunities, more speaking begets more
Mm.
speaking.
That is so good. I mean, even if you're a volunteer and you get to go up and make an announcement, you get to speak, and that the more you speak and practice, the better you get. I just have loved it. Okay, here's my last question. Lewis, 10 years older, he's around the corner and he's knocking at your door, and you're going to go answer that door. What's he going to tell you?
Take a breath,
Hmm.
take care of yourself, and enjoy the journey.
That's a wise 10 years older Louis Lessig. This has been so much fun. Hey, for those that, I don't know, they heard all this great information you shared and they're like, I'm going to start following Louis. I want to learn more. Hey, I might even have some questions. What's the best way for them to connect and learn more about what you're doing?
As with so many folks on LinkedIn, if you just look up Louis Lessig, I'm happy to connect.
Okay.
In fact, if they connect there, remind me that they heard us and our conversation here on your awesome podcast, and put in there lead as sort of the subject line, or anything about being in their lane. I actually have some stuff. One would be a bit of a policy format, if you will, if they need an AI policy. And the other are some examples of some of the issues under Title VII, what may be considered some harm under the law, things to consider. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share that stuff. Bruce, I believe, just like you believe, that I think that the goal here is to help others.
Right.
And that's how things work. And the other thing is, if folks want to reach out, they're always welcome to email me at lessig@brownconnery.com.
That's fantastic, and I'll put that in the show notes. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm finishing up a video that I've been putting together for the last several months called "Find Your Lane: A Story of Hope," and that hope is an acronym, and it's about helping other people every day. And you're right. I think people want to help other people as well. You just have to let them know how you can help them or how they might need some help. And so for you sharing this, I think this is just such a big win for anyone listening. Well, all of a sudden they can get this information. So I'll put this information in the show notes. Reach out to Lewis. Yeah, definitely let him know. Lead lane. I love it. Mention the podcast. It makes that connection that much better. Lewis, it's been such a pleasure having you on. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and inside the courtroom and the boardroom. And this has been so much fun. And I can't wait to continue watching your journey ahead. And mostly appreciate your friendship. Thanks for coming on.
Right there with you, my friend. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Hey, I'll talk to you later.